Madame la Présidente, Excellences, collègues, amis, bonjour. This is the first time I address this Assembly since the removal of the government led by former President Assad in December. This development marks a new beginning for the Syrian people, who have suffered extreme violence and atrocities over the past 14 years and more. We are pleased that the Syrian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Assad Hassan al-Shabani, in his remarks in this very same room on February 26, stated that, quote, after the liberation of Syria, the new Syrian government allowed the UN Commission of Inquiry established by this Council to enter Syria after the former regime prevented it, end of quote. Effectively, the caretaker government granted us prompt access to Syria, providing opportunities for preliminary discussions with the new authorities on a number of human rights issues. We look forward to engaging further with the authorities to discuss cooperation and regular access to Syria for our work in the very near future. Since December, the Commission visited former government detention facilities in Damascus and rural Damascus, including Sednaya Military Prison, Air Force Intelligence Mezer Airport Branch, and the Military Intelligence Palestine Branch 235, where we had previously documented acts of torture and summary executions. We met with victims, witnesses, and civil society actors, vigorously promoting human rights, justice, and peace. We also discussed measures to prevent future violations and the need to protect evidence, including possible mass grave sites, for future truth and accountability efforts with the new Syrian authorities and actors. These visits impressed upon us the strength and the resilience of the Syrian people, who are already hard at work to pave the way for more of their fellow citizens to be able to return home. Thousands of prisoners were released in early December. They critically need physical and psychological rehabilitation, as well as support to address the legal effects of arbitrary measures taken against them and their families, including with respect to their property. What we saw during our on-site visits matched our previous findings of detention-related violations by the former government, most recently in our report, Web of Agony, which provides our most comprehensive analysis to date. Likewise, testimony from recently released detention survivors confirms that the previous government quashed dissent in ways amounting to crimes against humanity. In Syria, we also met with many families whose missing loved ones were not among the prisoners released in December. They now want the truth about their fate, and they want justice. The clarification of the fates of the tens of thousands who remain disappeared will require a large-scale effort led by the caretaker authorities along with technical support from human rights and humanitarian entities, including Syrian Civil Society and Families Association and the Independent Institution on Missing Persons in Syria, recently established. We stand ready to assist those efforts, including by sharing the relevant data we have gathered since 2011. We also met with communities affected by years of gross violations in rural Damascus, such as in Douma, Daraya, and Zabadani. We were impressed by their dignity and eagerness to tell the world about years of widespread arbitrary detention and enforced disappearances, unlawful attacks on residential areas, starvation and other cruel restrictions imposed during sieges, and forcibly displacement and discrimination by the former government. The extent of destruction of housing and civilian infrastructure that occurred during and after hostilities is shocking, as detailed in our December conference room paper, pillage and plunder, unlawful appropriation and destruction of properties of refugees and IDPs in Syria. Massive reconstruction will be needed supported by the international community. I'd like to repeat, supported by the international community if you want to see some progress. Syrians we met consistently call for justice and accountability as crucial for healing the wounds of the conflict through a range of actions, not only criminal proceedings against high-level perpetrators, essential, but also broader measures to ensure the right to truth, reparation and no repetition of mass atrocities. Today's Syria's economic and humanitarian situation remains catastrophic, while humanitarian funding is dwindling. 9% of the population is under the line of poverty. Economic despair is known to fuel violence. We urgently call for an end to sectoral sanctions and the removal of other barriers to recovery and reconstruction. Excellence, ending ongoing violence will also require a complete nationwide ceasefire, the disarming and reintegration of armed groups, securing public order, and ending the presence of foreign militaries on Syrian territory. Syrians are calling for the speedy restoration of their civil documentation and equal access to basic services like education and healthcare, freedom of expression and association, and the ability to challenge arbitrary restriction of decisions. We take note of the constitutional declaration approved by the Damascus authorities as the country's fundamental law for the upcoming 5 years. In addition to the reference on basic human rights and to general provisions on transitional justice, the declaration states that all rights and freedoms set out international human rights treaties, covenants, and agreements that the Syrian Arab Republic has ratified will form an inseparable part of the constitutional declaration. Much will depend on how these provisions into the constitutional text are implemented and respected across the country. It is worrying that violence and hostilities continue in several parts of the country, risking a return to a more widespread conflict. Recent extreme violence saw disturbing reports of hundreds of civilian deaths in villages, towns, and areas in the coastal regions of Latakia and Tartus, following coordinated attacks on security personnel. Eyewitnesses of the recent violence in coastal areas described to us how they saw their family members and neighbors shot and killed in front of them in what appears to be retaliatory attacks aimed at former government officials and members of the Alawi community. Such acts were also accompanied with looting and destruction of property. The violence triggered displacement of civilians. It could never have been expected that the wounds inflicted over decades of dictatorship and rampant human rights violations and abuses, war crimes, and crimes against humanity would heal quickly. Syria's failure will be determined by how the authorities and the Syrian people deal with both past and recent violations. We note the urgent steps taken by the caretaker authorities, including the establishment of an independent inquiry into these recent events. We hope to meet soon in Damascus with this commission, which will need to operate without interference, maintain its independence and integrity, and present its findings comprehensively to the government and the Syrian public. Our own monitoring into these incidents are ongoing, in accordance with our regular mandate, and our findings will be shared with the caretaker government and presented to this Council in future reporting. While verifying digital information, including videos we have authenticated, we have established that some of the videos circulating online and purporting to show violations committed during these events in fact relate to events dating from years ago and that took place in other countries and conflicts. A large amount of incendiary and hateful speech is circulating online in relation to the recent violence, which risks fueling further tensions and violence. As you can see in the report presented to the Council today, the situation in South Syria remains volatile, with increased attacks and incursions carried out by Israel since 9 December, greatly destabilizing the country as it attempts to heal. Israeli evacuation orders have displaced civilians in rural Quneitra, seemingly without any imperative military reason, and expanding well beyond the lines agreed to the 1954 Disagreement of Forces Agreement. Further north, ISIL is reportedly increasing activities in central and eastern Syria, and thousands of people allegedly affiliated with ISIL remain held in Syrian democratic custody. We have taken note of last week's agreement between the caretaker authorities and the commander of the SDF, in which they agree not only to a nationwide ceasefire, but also guarantee the rights of all Syrians in political representation and participation going forward. For years, northeast Syria has witnessed hostilities between Syrian National Armed Forces and the SDF. We have been investigating several recent attacks in the area that reportedly led to civilian casualties and impacted electricity and water supplies to the region, as well as reports of arbitrary detention. Madame la Présidente, the caretaker government and future Syrian authorities have an opportunity to chart a new path and ensure that the horrors of the past and last few weeks are never repeated. The Syrian people must decide what steps to take. Merci infiniment.